So we hear this text, and if you're like me, you're thinking to yourself, whoa, what the heck is going on? All of a sudden we're in the Old Testament, and I know who Elijah is. Or wait, is that Elisha? Either way. But who is this Ahab guy, and what are they doing here? Elijah is a prophet, and we've probably figured that out. What has happened right before this is that Israel has been receiving the kings that they so desperately wanted. But they're not quite living up to the hope that God has for Israel. In fact, this Ahab is the worst. Worse than the other kings that held the throne before him. And it's written literally almost just like that a chapter or two before this text. Ahab is the worst. Ahab is not Elijah's favorite either. Not only does he begin to include other gods in the capital, particularly this Baal character, which we hear a lot in the Old Testament, but he marries a woman from a different race, different gods, and then proceeds to have priests and prophets of Yahweh, the God of Israel, executed. Now Elijah has been on the run, and some pretty cool things have been happening. God told him that there was going to be a 3-year flood. Coincidentally, Baal is the god of fertility and of thunderstorms, among many other things, depending on who you are, where you're from. So it's clear that God is flexing God's muscles at this Baal character, right? God would be showing Ahab and the priests that Baal that without a doubt it was the God of Israel that was still in control of this drought and what's going on in the world. So Elijah has been on the run, eating what food the crows could bring him, and he even stayed with a woman and her son, healed her son, and then he was eventually tracked down by one of Ahab's subordinates. All this is to say, this has been building up for like several chapters, and we just jumped right in here. For them, it's been building up for several generations. Ahab, Elijah, the prophets of Baal, and a whole lot of other people find themselves on Mount Carmel. And it's here that Elijah makes his move, and he challenges the prophets. You can't follow both Yahweh and Baal, cries Elijah. Who's it going to be? The people just kind of stare blankly back at him, not making a single noise. Kind of just like that. It's in that moment that Elijah realizes he is the only prophet left for God against the 450 prophets of Baal. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a contest. You and your 450 prophets will go first. All you got to do is take this bull, gather this wood for a fire like you were going to sacrifice it, and then you're going to call on the name of your God. And if they hear you, they're going to light the fire for you. It makes sense, right? I'll do the same, except I'm on Team Yahweh. So the prophets of Baal begin to gather the wood and the kindling, and they're preparing their fire. They get their bull ready. It doesn't take them long. Well, there are about 450 of them. It only took so long because there were too many people trying to help. I'm sure we've all seen that. The prophets of Baal begin to cry out, but nothing happens. They continue to cry out from the morning to noon in the heat, and yet nothing happens. Elijah's just kind of sitting over there in the shade of a tree watching what's happening, and it's noon now. The sun's way up there. It's beating down on everybody. And I don't know if Elijah's just getting tired or if he's getting frustrated by the whole situation, but he begins to sort of poke fun at the prophets. Hey guys, maybe you just need to be a little bit louder. I think Baal's asleep. Or maybe he had to make a run to the corner store and he'll be back in just a bit. You know, kind of these little snide comments that he's making. I'm sure that after being out in the sun all day, hearing these words ticks them off. It would make me so mad. Half the day is gone now, and they are becoming frustrated and desperate. The prophets of Baal decide that self-mutilation is what Baal demands of them, and so they begin to cut themselves in the hope that Baal would answer them. As noon comes and goes, their fire remains unlit. Now it's Elijah's turn to see what he can do. While the others had 450 to help gather the wood, prepare the altar, it's only Elijah for Team Yahweh. I mean, and if you have to slaughter a bull, I mean, I'm just assuming, I've never done that, but I'm assuming if you slaughter a bull, you have to move it. That sucker's going to be heavy. So Elijah begins by building an altar, and he does that with 12 stones, recalling the history of their people and invoking the promises of God to God's people, remembering the 12 tribes. I only have 10 fingers. 12 tribes of Israel. He lays out the wood, he digs a trench, he prepares the bull. Elijah reaches into his tunic for his big lighter and then reaches toward the wood, and then he stops. He looks over at the people who are watching and he says, "Hey, I want you to come on over here." So they all shuffle to the altar and they get a little bit closer. Then Elijah says, "Hey, I need you guys to go fill up those jars with some water." When they returned with the water, Elijah looked straight into Ahab's eyes and he says, "Why don't you pour that on the wood?" "You mean the wood that you're trying to burn?" Yeah. All right. So they do it. And then Elijah continues to ask them to do it a total of 3 times. And then they're like, "Why didn't you just ask us to do it all at once?" So Elijah calls out to the Lord, "Show this people that you are God. Prove to them that you can hear me, God." What happens? Shazam! Not to be confused with Kazam, which is the movie where Shaq plays the genie, and it did terrible. I'm so glad people got that. Fire erupts from the altar that Elijah prepared. The fire burns so brilliantly that all shield their eyes from the bull, from the wood, from the stones they're being incinerated. The puddles of water are consumed by the ferocious blaze. This is big news. This is a big deal. The God of the Hebrews, the God of the Israelites, the God of the 12 tribes of Israel has not forgotten about the people or the terrible drought that they're in. God is still in control. It is a reminder of God's covenant with the people and the hope that God has. Not to follow the whims and flimsy belief systems of the dominant powers, but to follow God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the one who hopes for justice, the bringer of peace and hope. This is the God who has the hearts and minds of the people. Now, if you've been out there all day and then you just see Elijah just toss up a fireball, I mean, that would be pretty awesome. You'd just be like, "Woo, all right, Yahweh." It's a fun ending to our story today, but this is where the lectionary fails us. The story continues in the next verse. There's only one more verse in the story, but you can easily see why it was left out. But I think for us to be faithful in how we read the Bible and how we interpret things, we have to include this. Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal, do not let one escape." Then they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the Wadi Kishon and killed them there. I mean, that totally takes the entire text and just takes it in a different direction for us, I think. The ending of this text, as well as the hunting down of the priests and the prophets of the Yahweh, it creates a problem for the modern follower of Jesus. It is counter to the way that we see Jesus expressed, and it resembles a vindictive justice that reflects more earthly desire than heavenly. This isn't where we're going with this morning, but I can't not read that. We can't ignore the violent and destructive nature that's sometimes in the text. We have to, even if we don't know what to do with it, sometimes you just have to hold it up there and be like, "This is here." We can't just ignore it. We can't just pretend that it's like not there. But this text as a whole is also tough, as it seems to be less about the power of God and more about how does God answer prayer. There is no doubt that Yahweh exists, but only if Yahweh will respond when called upon by Elijah. Elijah calls up to God and boom, God answers with a flaming ball of fire. There may be some who could share this or a similar experience of interacting with God in prayer, but not me. And I don't know a lot of people that can, but there are people out there that have. It has the possibility of presenting the image of a petty God who needs glorification, who needs blood sacrifice, and condones a redemptive justice, an eye for an eye. That's what I'm talking about when I say redemptive justice. And it leaves hardly any room for grace. Truthfully, I would be terrified if someone wielded that power, even if they were on my side. And it raises questions for the modern hearer about the purpose of prayer. When you pray, what do you pray for? What do you expect to happen when you pray? Have you seen God respond and not respond to the prayers that you share? This text is massive, and the story is a long one, and it's much more than just what we shared today. There is much left to be teased out, but as we end our time this morning, I want to share a quote that we talked about in Young Adults this week concerning prayer, and it's by a theologian called Soren Kierkegaard. It's fun to say, Kierkegaard. The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays. If we find this to be true, we have not control over God through prayer, but we have control over ourselves. Of course, God wants us to talk to Him. When we spend time in prayer, in reflection, in meditation, in hiking and fishing, or whatever means it is that you use to intentionally spend time with God, you reveal piece by piece the divine nature that's within you. You are uncovering who you really are and freeing yourself of the constraints of who you think you should be or who you think culture's telling you to be. You are free to be the person that God created and intended you to be. By spending time with God in reflection, in time of joy, in time of despair, or wherever we find ourselves, simply being with God changes our nature. As we grow and pray, we must continue to ask the question, who is it that God has created us to be? Amen.